Coming up on Dialogue Weekend, China reports new COVID-19 cases of local transmission and from overseas. What's behind the rising numbers and how is China reacting? The US Capitol riot has come to an end. But what does it mean for the country going forward? And this week's newsmaker. Now on Dialogue Weekend.
Hello, welcome to Dialogue Weekend. I'm Xu Qinduo. Well, China has recently granted its first COVID-19 vaccine approval. The latest cluster of coronavirus infections in northern China's Hebei Province is causing jitters for the public. What's behind the recent outbreak, and what are the challenges in prevention and control for China's upcoming holiday season? To learn more, we are joined by Professor Wu Zhiwei, Director of the Center for Public Health Research at Nanjing University Medical School, and Teng Jianquan, Director of the Center for Arms Control at the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome, Jianquan and Zhiwei there. So we know that the situation, it's like a new outbreak. In particular, Zhiwei, I believe you have been following the situation. It's a bit surprising for a lot of people when we see, because we are used to the cases of 2 or 3 infections, but in Shijiazhuang, in Hebei Province, sometimes it's dozens, obviously. Are you surprised, how serious is the situation, Zhiwei?
Well, actually, I am a little bit surprised for the sudden burst of the new cases. Apparently, this is something actually has been going on for a little bit of while, and we don't really know exactly what's going on, but it is something you need to be worried about, because what we saw is that it's not only in Shijiazhuang, but also in other, vicinity cities as well, that you do see some new cases coming out. I think the worrying thing also is that we don't know exactly how this was started and where the origin of this virus is. So there are a lot of unknowns here. We need to just, look into it very carefully.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, the research is still ongoing to locate the source of the latest infection or the upsurge in Shijiazhuang and a couple of other places in Hebei Province. But I wonder, over the past, basically, the year, mostly we have imported cases following a lot of trade, between China and other countries. But also, local transmission is rare. But because of maybe the winter time, somehow the virus remains active or become active. If you look at not only China, but also other countries, you do see, second wave, fourth wave, different waves of infection. Is that also a factor, Zhiwei?
Yeah, I think, there are a lot of reasons. I think that definitely this is probably one of them. The virus, we knew that it's definitely very contagious, very persistent in terms of transmission and infections. In other parts of the world, we have seen is that if you enforce the preventive measures such as quarantine and avoid social gatherings, the virus will go down. But if you lose a little bit and the people starting moving around, then the virus will come back. So this is something actually it's pretty worrying that once you we know that in the past we pretty much come back to normal life. I think in a way that people may lose their vigilance. I think that there could also be an factor contributing to the virus rebound. So this is something actually we need to be highly vigilant and keeping in mind that before we put down the virus completely, we have to be prepared for that.
Mm-hmm. Jianquan, as someone living in Beijing, which is very close to Hebei Province over there, do you see people around you, in your workplace or friends, families? Do you in general see people, become more vigilant because of the latest outbreak?
Yeah, I have got such a feeling, recently, and the people, in my office and in some other places, I got the, alarming clock again, again, and I think the people should be very cautious because of such a, a cunning, virus. You cannot give a detailed description of such a virus. So you should be very well the danger, and you should be well prepared for such a challenge. Actually, in recent months, the Chinese people, some of the cities have already, relaxed a little bit, gave not so strict restrictions on the traveling and on the, some public places. They didn't give any, strict restrictions on the exchanges of the people. So this time we should be very prepared and we should be cautious because of such a cunning, very dangerous virus we are facing now.
Well, Zhiwei, of course, if as long as there's a public awareness, enough awareness, and then it's easier for the public or for the government to seek the cooperation, to seek the assistance even from the public. But at the same time, of course, as we said at the very beginning, China has approved a vaccine, Sinopharm, produced by the Chinese firm there, with efficacy 79%. And then recently, we know that the clinical trial of another Chinese vaccine, actually the third phase of clinical trial done by Brazil, the efficacy is pretty encouraging, 78% efficacy. Tell us more about the Chinese vaccines. In particular, if you compare them with those by Pfizer, by Moderna, by Sputnik in other countries.
This is definitely very good news when a new vaccine is joining available for people to take. The two Chinese vaccines are based on the inactive virus, so this is something. It's a very traditional technology. We know that it has demonstrated safety and effectiveness as well. In the early clinical trials, both Chinese vaccines showed very good safety profile, and also the efficacy is also pretty good. So the difference between the Chinese vaccine and the Pfizer and Moderna is actually they are different immunogens. Moderna's and the Pfizer's are mRNA based, so it requires extreme cold chain for transportation and storage. So the Chinese vaccine actually definitely have certain advantages that you don't need a very stringent transportation and storage facilities, and it's easy to handle. So that's something actually we have to bear in mind in countries like China. If you're going into rural areas, it's hard to imagine that you have to store the vaccine in -70. So this is definitely a very good advantage. So this is something actually I think is very encouraging, particularly in this period when we see the rebound of a virus. But I think I would advise people that have to bear in mind that we shouldn't purely rely on the vaccines, particularly in the early stage of vaccinations. We have to keep vigilant and also take proper public health measures, avoid public gatherings, wearing your mask, washing your hands. Those are very old tricks, which actually we know very effective in containing the virus from spreading.
Well, Zhiwei, with obviously some of the Chinese cities have launched the vaccination process, with the high risk group, being the first, and then probably it will start to the vaccination with common folks out there. But to what percentage we need of the population in order to achieve the so-called community immunity, later this year, maybe, or at what point you are expecting we can achieve that kind of immunity?
Well, this is a very good question because the experts are still arguing whether it's 70% or 80% or even higher. It very much depends on the transmissibility and the speed of the transmission and the population mobility. There are a lot of complex factors may impact on the effectiveness of the vaccines. But I would see, as a lot of experts, they have the consensus that something around 70 or 80% might be a proper percentage to provide a meaningful protection or contain the virus. But for vaccination reach that percentage in a big country like China, it will take some time. It's not only about whether the effective vaccines and your production. also involves a lot of resources mobilizations, distribute the vaccines, and also administrating the vaccines. It's a very tough job considering such a large scale vaccine coverage. So we have to be patient. I know that the Chinese authority has ramped up the vaccine production and the logistics, but still it will take a while to accomplish this goal.
Very challenging job, but the Spring Festival is rapidly approaching, basically in about a month's time. Any suggestion, to the public, because in the past, usually this is the time for millions and millions of Chinese be on the move, moving from one city to another. And what do they need to do?
Yeah, my suggestion is, if you can or if you don't have to go home, then stay where you are. And so that would actually reduce the traveling, reducing the contact with other people. During the spring traveling season, it's almost impossible to avoid a large gathering of people when people, they cluster in such a short period and going different places. So this is the ideal opportunity and the environment for the virus to spread. So I would advise that if you can stay where you are, then just stay there and avoid unnecessary traveling.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Zhiwei. Well, let's move on to from China to the U.S. The U.S. Congress has affirmed President-elect Joe Biden's victory after supporters of President Donald Trump stormed the U.S. Capitol. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi threatened to move ahead with impeachment over President Trump's role in inciting the violent attack if he doesn't resign. So what's the political and social fallout of the Capitol Hill violence? To find out more, we are joined by Joseph Gregory Mahoney, professor of politics at the East China Normal University. Welcome to the show, Professor Mahoney. So here, obviously, the focus is on, after the riot in the Capitol Hill, and the remaining about 10 days, what will happen to President Trump? Will he automatically resign, or he somehow be forced to move from his post?
Well, I think right now it's very unlikely that we're going to see him resign. Cynically, we can say that he has too many people to pardon, and that number has likely increased since last week. And there's also the concern that he wants to pardon himself and his own family. So I think in his own mind, he has a lot that he needs to accomplish before he's pushed out on January 20th. It also appears unlikely that that Vice President Pence will trigger the 25th Amendment. And even if he did, we have cabinet members who are resigning, so it's not clear how that would work. It does look like Pelosi will introduce articles of impeachment either Monday or some other time early this week. But it's unlikely that those will mature and make it to the Senate in time for a trial before he leaves. So I think the bigger question at this point is really who's in charge. On the day of the riots, we had Pence, who was talking with the Pentagon. We had Pelosi communicating with the Pentagon yesterday. We have a president who's isolated from his own aides because they're worried about being called on sedition charges. We have a Senate that is yet to be seated with the new people being voted in Georgia just in the past couple of days. The incoming president doesn't have any of his new cabinet confirmed. So I think we're in this period where we lack a clear leadership, we lack a clear chain of command, and in the meantime, we have 4,000 people a day dying from COVID.
Well, Professor Mahoney, as you said, the likely scenario is impeachment process probably started in the House by Nancy Pelosi. But we know that's a process that will take some time, probably more than 10 days after President Trump finishes his term. So will the impeachment continue or just stop over there?
I think that's a question that hasn't been answered. My suspicion, and I haven't seen anyone else talking about this, but my suspicion is that if this persists into the Biden administration, Biden will have a tremendous incentive to pardon Trump himself, not only to protect the power of the presidency, not only to potentially undo some sort of constitutional crisis if Trump tries to pardon himself, but also to try to pacify the tens of millions of people who adore Trump, many of whom are still calling for violent action.
Well, Jianqing here, of course, the remaining days of President Trump, some people say that's also dangerous days. There's talk of, I think it's Nancy Pelosi, basically telling her colleagues in the Congress that he talked to the Pentagon about resolving the potential risk for the nuclear code. Of course, on one hand, President Trump probably will be busy with pardons, but on the other hand, people are worried about how dangerous he is. Are you worried about that?
No, I don't worry about that, because after the riot in the Capitol here in January 6th, actually Donald Trump just had changed his policy or strategy to have a more safe place for his coming days, not only for the presidency of the United States. And actually the Democratic Party, especially under the leadership of Speaker Pelosi, they would like to give some removal of the president within 10 days and the impeachment for the president in 10 days. They can't do that because of the process can sharply reduced or shortened in maybe in 1 week, and they can do that without hearings, without investigations against Donald Trump. This is actually a political game played by the Democratic Party and the representatives in the House. But I think the President Donald Trump will give himself a pardon at this moment. That might be the number one job at this moment in the coming days, not to make trouble. He would like to have some pardon from the Vice President or from the Congress of the United States.
Well, Professor Mahoney, Trump might, of course, be busy with the pardons, including himself. But then, you see his tone, his attitudes, he remained defiant. Before Twitter basically took down his account completely from the platform, his last tweet basically was advocating or was boasting of his support, like 75 million votes. He's the president, etc. But by banning him from the platform, is the Congress, is the Twitter somehow making him more dangerous?
I think that's a question that we're all struggling with right now, and I think that a lot of people, when they saw Zuckerberg talking about permanently banning him with Facebook and now Twitter, or Zuckerberg suspending him and then Twitter permanently suspending his account, there's a lot of distrust of these tech giants, of these tech platforms in the United States across the political spectrum. On the one hand, people should hold these platforms culpable for the years of conspiracy theory and misinformation that people like Donald Trump have foisted, not only on the American people but in the global media. I think with disastrous results, many of which we can see now, in terms of not only the violence but how poorly we've handled COVID. So I think that there is a bigger concern about whether or not we have some way forward with information, and whether or not we can trust these platforms and these tech giants to really have the broader best interest in mind, and whether or not Donald Trump is able to find a new platform, create a new platform, is really a secondary concern at this point.
Well, exactly. As the former U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, said that basically this is un-American probably to ban the president from enjoying freedom of speech. But anyway, if you look forward, President-elect Biden, obviously one of the priority is to heal the nation. So Professor Mahoney, how tough is the job? Given the people in the Capitol Hill, whatever you call them, some people they call themselves revolutionaries. They were once called patriots by Ivanka Trump at one point. And of course, now everybody is calling them as resurrectionist or terrorist even. So how hard it is for Biden to try to bring all the people to have a shared sense of the country?
I think the thing we have to keep in mind is that this country had a lot of problems before Trump took power, and in fact, he really exploited those concerns. He, if we recall, his "Make America Great Again" campaign was really hitting on the idea that we had trouble, that we had problems, and that he was going to try to solve them. These problems stretch back decades. We have growing income inequality. We have a middle class that's being hollowed out. We have a working class that's struggling to compete in the global labor force. And as a result, we have people who are angry and upset, and they're looking for someone to blame. We also have deep systemic crises. We have institutional incapacities. So, Biden, he's going to change his style. There may be some substantive changes, but it's going to be really hard to not only fix the immediate political problems, but to actually roll out an effective vaccine strategy, to actually start getting this under control in terms of the pandemic, but also rebuilding the economy and rebuilding international relations. All of these things are in a deep state of disarray, and I think that we should have very temperate expectations for the near term.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jian-Chun, briefly, similar question. Under obviously, President Biden-elect, he will have a lot of challenges, in particular domestically. The vaccination, the virus, and also healing the nation. But also in terms of a foreign policy, he also talked about basically coming to terms with the Europeans and then challenge China. What do you expect out of this?
I'm sure President-elect Joe Biden will shift a little bit on the U.S. diplomacy, including the enhancement of military alliance with NATO members, with Japan, with ROK. So this is a big choice. After the World War II, actually the United States just has used such a military alliance to promote its influence all over the world. This is a pillar for the world hegemony of the United States. And economically speaking, I'm sure Joe Biden will address the rule of law, the so-called rule of law, including the reform of WTO, and the United States might, enter TPP or now CPTPP, and the U.S. would like to be the key player in this mechanism to control the development for such economic system. So this is actually a new way for the United States to deal with competitors and rivals in the world, both in politics and also in economy.
Well, let's leave there for now and take a look at this week's Newsmaker. Well, Elaine Chao, the Transportation Secretary, of course, Education Secretary, divorced over there, and the Deputy National Security the Advisor, Matt Pottinger, and a series of names. So, Jian-Chun, what is the purpose? Why they are leaving now?
I'm sure a different, person in this regard has different, ideas to leave the office or leave the cabinet. Because, for example, Madam Jill, I think why she was the first cabinet member raise her hand and she would like to go because of her husband, actually the leader McConnell, actually a leader, of the Republicans in the former, Senate. I mean, the 116 Senate. So this is actually a result of the politics in the United States, and it's a power struggle. I'm sure Donald Trump was very angry with the attitude of his follower, all the Republicans, just after the presidential election last November. So this is actually a reaction to the situation they are facing now. They have to go because of their, the challenges they are facing now.
Professor Mahoney, a number of officials, probably more officials, will quit the Trump administration in the wake of the Capitol Hill riot over there. They are doing it now. Is that for their self-interests, or somehow they say, hey, it's the time somehow Trump is intolerable. I cannot continue with him now. But they have been with him for the past 4 years.
Yeah, I think that there are a number of competing interests. I would agree that Elaine Chao resigning in part has to do with Trump's dissatisfaction with Mitch McConnell, her husband. But I think also with her and DeVos, you have people who want to dissociate themselves with a president who may be charged with sedition. They don't want to be seen as complicit. Neither Elaine Chao nor Betsy DeVos were particularly memorable as secretaries. I don't think that anyone can really name any major accomplishments that they've had over the past 4 years. They aren't really central to security or international diplomacy. You have other people who are strangely quiet, like Mike Pompeo. But I think in the case of these resignations, what you're seeing is quite often typical at this point in a normal transition. People start leaving. It's only remarkable, I think, because they want to avoid the association. But again, they might also be worried that Pence might trigger Article 25 or the 25th Amendment, and they may then find themselves in an uncomfortable vote that would further erode their position among a great number of people. So I think there are a lot of competing interests right now. I think it's really just every man or woman for himself. So we'll see.
Well, is there a concern with the number of officials quitting the administration right now? Will people somehow be concerned with the political stability, who will be in charge, whether the country will function normally for the remaining 10, 11 days? Professor Mahoney?
Yeah, I think there is a serious concern. As I said before, there's really a lack of clarity right now about who the real commander-in-chief is. I mean, constitutionally, it remains Donald Trump. But again, we have Pence, who was communicating with the Pentagon during the riots. We have, which is not prescribed by the Constitution. We have Pelosi, who was communicating with the generals about nuclear codes yesterday. We have a vice president who apparently is not talking to the president, or vice versa. We have senior aides who are not communicating with the president, one, because they don't want to face him, but also because they don't want to be called later in potential criminal proceedings. So who's in charge? Who's he getting advice from? Who's he listening to? Is the military listening to him? These are very big questions and disturbing questions that not only affect global security but national security.
So full of uncertainties in the remaining 10 days. Thank you, Professor Mahoney. With that, we are coming to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. You can find me on Twitter, Xu Qinduo. Thanks for watching. See you next week.